Hello, my friends. This is Deepak Chopra, and I'm very honored today to have a conversation with Dr. Jonas, Dr. Wayne Jonas, and we're going to talk about integrative health and his new book, which is very exciting. I just finished reading it, How Healing Works, Get Well and Stay Well, Using Your Hidden Power to Heal by Wayne Jonas, MD, extraordinary reviews. I've read it, and I think this is a milestone in understanding the future of well-being as we envisage it in the next decade and more. So, Wayne, we've known each other a while, but let's go a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to medical school? A little bit of history always gives a personal touch to your amazing work.
Well, thank you, Deepak, and I appreciate you doing this interview. It's a great pleasure to talk to you, and been an admirer of your work for many decades. So it's really an honor to be here. So I grew up as a military brat, living literally all over the world. My father was a chaplain, minister in the military for 30 years, and so I was exposed to cultures from very early on. Lived in Asia when I was a child, then in Germany, then in the middle of New York City, and then the country side in Oklahoma, California, born in Idaho. So really, literally all over. I grew up realizing that the world was a pretty big place, that there were a lot of different concepts in the world, explanations about, how did we get here? Who were we? This type of thing. And then, of course, my father being a minister would penetrate sort of deeply into the idea of meaning and purpose in life, the spiritual component of life. And so I always was curious about that. And so would always explore, well, what is the meaning of healing, both from the physical perspective when I became a physician later on, but also from the spiritual, from the deeper perspective, and tried to explore that. And as I got into doing mainstream conventional education, which I did at Wake Forest in North Carolina, and then ultimately in the military for 24 years, I realized that what I had been learning from a very narrow Western focus, which was largely focused just on the physical, was missing some of the most important parts of what we were as human beings. And that if we didn't take into consideration who we were as whole human beings, that we were actually going to continue to suffer more than we needed to, and lose the attempt to tap into some of the most powerful healing capacity that we had. And so we had to go beyond pills and procedures in those areas. And I had the great opportunity then to be a researcher. I've been a researcher really since day one. I did my first randomized controlled trial when I was a resident doing a residency, and found I learned that one of my patients who was getting markedly better in her pain and arthritis turned out to be in the placebo group. And I realized that I was missing something here, that the pills and procedures that I was bringing to the table, very powerful in many circumstances, were not nearly the whole equation. And I had to learn from the cultures that I'd really been exposed to, and to go back as an investigator, as a researcher, as a clinician, to really learn what was healing all about. And were there's some common components that cut across all healing traditions and all healing components that really form the fundamentals of how healing works. And that's what I tried to put into the book.
That's great, Jonas, Wayne Jonas. Your name, I frequently, confuse your first name with the
Well, in
last.
Europe, they call me Jonas anyway, or John Wayne sometimes, or the Jonas
May
Brothers.
I just call you Wayne? Okay.
You can call me Wayne. That's fine.
So, Wayne, I know that you were in the military yourself as a doctor, that you also had a short stint, or maybe relatively long stint at the NIH. Can you say a little bit about the NIH and what you were leading there in the effort to bring about integrative medicine?
Yes. Well, I was at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. I was running a training program to teach people how to do research there. It's called the Medical Research Fellowship. But I had been exposed to integrative approaches or traditional and non mainstream approaches, as I said, throughout my life. And also in my career, when I was in Germany, the German physicians were using a lot of things that I hadn't learned about: herbal medicines, acupuncture, homeopathy, this type of thing. And so I got very curious about that. And wanted to know, was there a bigger medical bag that I was missing, that I need to put more stuff in my medical bag? And so when the Office of Alternative Medicine opened up at the NIH, I literally worked right across the street, and I said, "This would be interesting, wouldn't it? Let me go over there and see if I can use the knowledge and the experience for research training that I learned at Walter Reed and my exposure to these types of practices, in Europe and in Asia, and see if I can apply it within that particular setting." So fortunately, they agreed to let me do that. I came over there and ran what was a very, very small little office, $2 million within a $20 billion operation, to put what I called homeopathic amounts of research money into this area. Well, as it turns out, it was a pretty big world, and there are many things from traditional practices from all over the world that have a lot of value and needed to have a much bigger investment. And so I was there about 3.5 years, and it was supposed to be just an assignment. I never actually left the military. I was detailed over there on a temporary assignment. But during that time, I realized that if it didn't become its own center with its own funding instead of a little office in the headquarters, that it really wasn't going to go anywhere. It wasn't going to have the impact that it needed to. So I made it my mission there to actually create a center, get the laws changed to create its own center, like an institute, and get its own budget. So year after year, it could begin to explore this vast world of healing that existed outside of mainstream medicine. And so that's what happened. And then I left, went back, and became an academic at the Uniformed Services University, and then left and ended up working for some philanthropists, Henry and Susan Samueli, running the Samueli Institute, and now I work directly for their foundation to make whole person healing routine and regular.
I'm speaking with Dr. Wanye Jonas. He's the author of this extraordinary book, How Healing Works, sitting here on my desk. I've just finished reading it and I've made some notes. So if you don't mind, I'm going to use my notes to ask you some questions. In your book, How Healing Works, you mentioned that when you first began practicing medicine, you thought that pills and procedures you gave to patients were the primary reason they got well. So, and then you learned over 40 years that that perspective was not quite correct. But Wayne, we have to acknowledge that if somebody has pneumonia, they need an antibiotic. If they break their leg, they should probably see an orthopedic surgeon. Or
Right.
if they have acute appendicitis, maybe it needs to come out. So there's a role for pharmaceutical intervention, for pills, for surgery, for radiation under certain circumstances. But you're talking about the fact that this is not total well-being or whole systems approach, even though it's very effective in acute illness, acute intervention. But when it comes to chronic illnesses like, say, diabetes or heart disease or cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular accidents, even other diseases like autoimmune illness and, of course, Alzheimer's, many types of cancer. I've been working with Rudy Tanzi at Harvard. He informs me that only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. That if you have one of those 5% gene mutations, say like a BRCA gene for breast cancer, that's going to guarantee breast cancer. So you should have a mastectomy as a prevention. CRISPR and all these technologies are coming that will read genes like barcodes, like emails, and then cut and paste the genes as we do emails, delete the defective gene and insert the healthy gene. But what I'm told by Rudy and all these other people, that even that is not a solution because gene activity is regulated, as we now know, through lifestyle. So, what have you learned in the last 40 years that has changed your perspective?
Yes. Well, there's no question about it that at the right time, at the right place, there's nothing better than Western medicine for saving your life, for fixing a broken bone, for removing a tumor, for the what I call the acute manifestations of chronic disease. When that happens, you need good conventional medicine, and it is powerful. It is transformed radically the health or at least the longevity of people. We no longer die of many diseases that we used to die of years ago, 100 years ago, or in underserved countries or developing countries where they don't have that infrastructure because they don't have that kind of a medicine. We're extremely good at saving people's lives and prolonging their lives by keeping the diseases from killing them. However, that same system is not good at preventing those same diseases, at changing the underlying causes of those diseases, or even at healing them, reversing those illnesses that we now know can occur. You just mentioned the genetic influence being only about 5% of penetrating into many of these diseases. And in fact, the environment, the physical environment, the behavior, the moods and the attitudes, one's own consciousness can influence the expression of those same genes. And therefore, we have influence over even those genetic factors. And it's a great myth to think that we are fixed in any way. That just because we've been handed a body and a set of genes, that means we're destined for certain things. And conventional medicine doesn't do very well in managing those types of things. And we see that now in a healthcare system that waits and throws expensive interventions late instead of preventing them, and not engaging in the things that can often reverse things like obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, which we now know it's possible to heal, and therefore keep from even having to spend that in the first place. And the result, of course, is that we have a system that is costing more and more, that is producing less and less health outcomes, less and less health in our entire population, and is getting so expensive that the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the disparities, is growing. All the things that we want to see happen with the healthcare system are going in the wrong direction, and it's primarily because we need a new way of thinking about chronic disease. We need to apply rescue medicine that you've just described when it's appropriate, when it's needed, and we need an ecological or a whole person mindset the rest of the time for prevention and the management of chronic disease. And that's what I mean by integrative care. It's the integration of the best of Western medicine with the best of non-pharmacological components, and most importantly, one's own behavior and lifestyle, which actually together make for the optimal types of healing environment and healing behaviors. That's the kind of a healthcare system that we need to move forward with if it's not going to be part of the problem and will become part of the solution to creating health in our population.
Well, I've seen the evolution of this whole approach over the last 25, 30 years, and you've been a pioneer in leading this. I've seen various labels described to this effort of ours. Alternative medicine, you just mentioned, integrative medicine, whole health medicine, they all say the same thing that we're talking about. So why did you feel the need to write this book now at this period?
Yeah. Well, Deepak, I wrote the book because I'm afraid that our culture suffers from a delusion about where health comes from. We see, every night on the news advertisements for a new drug, a new approach, etc. And it makes you feel like health and well-being comes from taking those pills and going and seeing your doctor. And most people still feel like, well, gee, if I have a health problem, it's my doctor that is going to solve it. And that is a delusion. We actually know, and the data is very, very clear. It's been collected from many parts of the country with top level reports, the National Academy of Medicine and many others, showing that even if we had total access to healthcare as we currently deliver it, it would only produce about 15 to 20% of health in the nation. The nation would only benefit by about 15 to 20%. That's because the other 80%, the vast majority of it, doesn't come from medical care. It comes from your own behaviors, our own awareness, our own lifestyle, the environments in which we live in, and how we engage in that with our family, with our friends, and in our own life. Those core determinants of health is where health comes from. So when they say, oh, you need to go see your doctor, you need to go see your doctor actually when you have certain things that you need, but other times you need to ask him how to engage in health and well-being. You know, we commissioned our foundation commissioned a Harris Poll survey during this pandemic that we're all in right now, and asked people, what are they learning from the pandemic? What were they trying to do to maintain their health and healing? And there was a large increase in awareness of the need for self-care. People are becoming aware that they need to pay more attention to their mental health. They need to pay more attention to stress and stress management. They need to engage in healthy behaviors. And at the same time, they were saying, I need help doing that. I need someone to assist me. I need a partner with that. And they were pointing to their healthcare providers and saying, please come. You have at your fingertips the knowledge about the science, about what works and doesn't work. Please join me as a partner in making to do that. And this is where healthcare needs to go in the light of the pandemic.
So, you know, you're talking about 80% of healing occurs organically, the importance of personal determinants. What are those personal determinants, and are they applicable even more in this crisis that we're having, the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, this pandemic has, if it's done anything, it has shown a spotlight on what happens when you begin to neglect those core components of healing from which most of health and well-being come from. Those that are at the highest risk of getting truly sick and dying from getting COVID are those with underlying chronic conditions, the same ones that if you don't reverse them, if you don't deal with the risk factors, put you at risk from being more susceptible to the virus. These are things like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. All these things can actually be improved, and many of them reversed through lifestyle and behavior components, okay? These underlying determinants of disease. And so the post-COVID situation, it's now beginning to be realized that those who get COVID, it's not over. 60 to 65% or more of patients who get COVID and then appear to recover actually don't fully recover. They continue to have chronic fatigue, chronic pain, mood and depression issues, and this type of thing, GI problems. And it is underlying determinants of healing that they need in order to recover from there. There's no magic bullet. We have no drug to actually make you fully recover in those areas. So you ask, what are those? Okay, what are those underlying determinants? Okay. There's three things. Number one is meaning and purpose. What you think about your life and what you realize can actually facilitate healing in your own life. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. Number two is your behavior, your lifestyle. Okay, that contributes huge amounts to the risk factors for getting chronic disease and COVID, and for recovering from chronic disease and healing yourself, and from recovering from COVID afterwards. The third one is the social and economic environment in which you live. So if you live in an environment in which you can't get healthy food, you don't have transportation, it's not safe, it's highly stressful, then you don't even have the tools necessary to engage in those underlying determinants. And those are called the social determinants of health. And unfortunately, those have gotten worse during the pandemic and made it more difficult for people to actually engage in the other two. And so people can take this knowledge, this awareness, under their own control and under their own hands and begin to work together collectively as a community with their healthcare practitioners to integrate those things into their day-to-day life and really become not only better in terms of their health and healing processes and well-being, but also reduce their risk from getting seriously ill if they get exposed to the virus.
So meaning and purpose, behavior, and social determinants. And of course, all the data shows that zip code is a very important determinant in who's going to get sick and how they'll be affected by the sickness, including morbidity and mortality. So those socioeconomic factors are, of course, extremely important. And I should just share with you a little bit of the research that we're doing at the Chopra Foundation. And we hope to collaborate with you at these and your nonprofit, the Sami Ali Institute, and pursue this collaboration in many areas. But in the last 5 years, we've published now many papers in peer-reviewed journals. I just want to summarize some of them. One is that it's obvious that all chronic illness is accompanied by some degree of depression and anxiety. Sometimes people don't even know that what the reason is, but they call it free-floating anxiety, depression. There's always accompanying inflammation with that, and there's chronic illness. They all go together, and sometimes the depression and anxiety and inflammation precede the disease by decades. That's one thing we found. The second thing we found, which was very interesting, is we did a one-week study on a meditation retreat over here when we collaborated with Harvard and UCSF and Scripps here down the street and Duke University. And in 1 week of this meditation, yoga, controlled breathing environment, we saw an increase in all the genetic activity that was associated with self-regulation, healing, or homeostasis. Some genes went up 17-fold over baseline. The level of telomerase, the enzyme that controls our genetic clock, went up by 40%. Our collaborator was Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering telomerase. She went on to write a book called The Telomere Effect, and many other people have now replicated these kinds of findings. Genes that cause self-regulation go up, and genes that cause inflammation or are associated with Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune illness go down. One of our researchers was a very well-known scientist from Mount Sinai in New York, and he presented this data at a conference. And it was pretty wild, the data, when it was first presented. Somebody asked Dr. Shah, his name, Eric, said, Dr. Shah, do you meditate? Do you do any of these practices? He said, no. Are you planning to? He said, no. You showed us these amazing findings right now on these practices. He said, yes, I'm going to figure out how to make drugs out of these. So that is still a huge mindset that doctors do not yet believe that the integrative approach that you are talking about actually is the right solution. They still believe that if we found out the metabolic pathways and we had the IPs for these metabolic pathways, that we could probably create a drug, so weight loss, for depression, for this, for that. But to my mind, that's not going to be possible. I don't think there's anything that's going to activate these genes collectively coming together, because genes are not nouns, they are verbs. Your body is not a noun, it's a verb. Your brain is not a noun, it's a verb, and it's it's actually the activity of all this is triggered by the factors that you talk about in your book, How Healing Works. So I'm recommending everybody, please buy the book, read it, engage with us, and tell us what you think, because we're going to continue with this research. And before I let you go, Wayne, you've been a big proponent of the idea that belief influences biology. You've studied the placebo effect. Many people dismiss the placebo as, oh, it's nothing, it's just happens. But, if belief becomes biology, then we need to rethink what placebo is. Can you share with me your interest in the placebo response and why belief influences biology?
Now, I'd be happy to do that, and I appreciate the research stories that you've told. I actually just got off the phone a couple days ago with Paul Mills, like one of your collaborators there at the Chopra Institute, who gets this and does detailed molecular biology in these particular areas, and really illustrates, as you've pointed out, that we are an ecological system. Our body is more like a garden than it is a machine. And unfortunately, there's not an economic engine behind cultivating your garden in these areas. And I don't think you can turn them all into to drugs safely. Belief in consciousness is a core part of this. And because we have a smorgasbord of opportunities to heal, what I try to offer to my patients is multiple ways into the healing journey. And they have to, first of all, realize that it exists for them, that that it's awareness for them, and this is where belief and consciousness come in. And the research on placebo, which I've pursued, we've published, dozens and dozens of articles on that. We support the Society of Interdisciplinary Placebo Studies. They'll have their national conference this coming spring again in Baltimore. That looks at this, and let me illustrate this with a couple stories. And I write about this, one of these in my book. It's called The Mindset Change by Alaya Crum, Stanford professor who's been doing research on the mindset, and she talks about a mind over stress. And she illustrates, we're in a very stressful time right now and people need help. And I've seen this in my own practice with many military folks who come back from being at war with PTSD and chronic stress and moral injury. And what she's demonstrated is that if you go into stress with the expectation that that stress is going to harm you, you will come out actually damaged, hurting, more difficult, more pain, etc., into this spiral that you mentioned. If you go into that stress with the mindset that that stress is going to actually make you stronger, that you're going to benefit from it, that there will be post-traumatic growth in those areas, with the same exact type of stress, you will end up stronger. You'll end up healthier. Your telomeres will actually get better in those areas. And so the mindset is the starting framework. So with all my patients, I look for the opportunity where they can get that aha moment, where they can see that meaning, purpose actually can empower them to engage in their own healing. And then a culture, which I think what you're trying to do, a culture that actually believes that, then allows us to all go on that healing journey together. And that's much more powerful than trying to do it alone. Extensive research on the placebo effect shows that collective belief produces an enhanced effect. It stimulates unconscious effects, which we're not even aware of, which individually we couldn't possibly control. And that if you do the same study in a certain culture with a certain belief, you'll get a completely different outcome than if you do it in another culture. And that's been published in JAMA, Nature Medicine, multiple other areas in those areas. And so I think that's a lesson for us right now, is that if we come together actually to create the understanding, which is based on science and based on fact, that a collective mindset for healing, where meaning and purpose actually involves giving back to the universe, giving back to each other, traveling together, in a supportive way, we will multiply the kinds of effects you demonstrated in your 1 week study with the genetic components in a retreat. Because after all, it was being collectively done, right? It was being done
That's it.
as a group in those areas. And that is representative of where the world needs to go at large.
So this has been an extraordinary conversation with Dr. Jonas, Wanye Jonas, a family physician, an expert in integrative health and healthcare delivery, a widely published scientific investigator, and author of How Healing Works. Dr. Jonas is the executive director of the Samuel Lee Integrative Health Programs, an effort supported by Henry and Susan Samueli to increase awareness and access to integrative health. So I recommend everyone listening to this conversation to check out the book, How Healing Works. And Wayne, I look forward to continued collaboration with you and spearheading with your leadership this new movement in our culture on true health reform, because everybody else is actually talking about insurance reform and not health reform.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a basic misunderstanding of what health is right there. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk to you and help promote this work. So thank you once again, and we'll be continuing this conversation, and hopefully this will be a global movement under your leadership.
Well, thank you, Deepak, and I appreciate all that you do and have done for so many decades in really transforming the way we see the world. Thank you.
Thank you.